Hi guys, and welcome to this tutorial on question 3 of the foundation paper for the GCSE English exam. And as with the other tutorials, I'm referring in this to the June 2012 exam. Now, if you're like any of my students and any students the country over, I'm sure that the language question is one of the most scary, and it's one that a lot of students struggle with and just find hard to tackle. So what I want really is for you to have some strategies before you go to the exam for tackling this, not to fear it, but to have some techniques and strategies at hand to make sure that you can, do your very best with it. It is worth 12 marks. So it's, 3 times, my maths learner, he said twice, 3 times as valuable as question 1A or question 1B. So it's really worth spending some time on, about 20 minutes at least of your time. Now, you will always get a question worded something like this that asks you how are language features used to inform about the trip and describe. So you're kind of looking for two purposes here. How is language informing us, and how is it describing about experiences? And in order to get a decent amount of marks on this, you would need to make sure you do address inform and describe. Not necessarily equally, but you would need to mention both of those. So what I'm looking for in this question is point, evidence, explain. Your point ideally being a language feature that you've identified, your evidence being a quote that exemplifies what that feature is, and then explaining, right, how does the example I've just chosen, how is it informative and or how is it descriptive? It's the kind of skill you do all the time in controlled assessments. So if you've done of Mice and Men or the poetry as a controlled assessment, it's the same skill. It's point, evidence, explain. It's just you point to language feature. So one thing to help a revision is really learn language features, know how to recognise an imperative, a simile, know how to identify a rhetorical question, know how to identify an anecdote. This is the thing you really need to work on and really need to revise. So looking at the mark scheme then, the mark band 1 is all about simple comments. There might be some textual evidence or a quote. There might be some reference of how it's informative, but it's limited. It's only when you're going into mark band 2 that you've got relevant quotes and that you're really focusing on language features that inform or describe. And you can comment on the effect of these features. Obviously moving up into mark band 3, which very few students actually achieve on this paper, is that you've got a developed comment on the effect of those features, and all of these are supported with relevant quotes. So you've got to focus on those language features that inform and describe, so they're expecting both of those to be addressed. Just going to look at 2 examples with you. As this student who was kind of lower down the mark bands, and additionally a student who did quite well on this one. Okay, so we can see immediately the students started here with a quote. "We're lucky men." The captain describes them as lucky men because last year in a storm his brother's ship was sunk and 18 drowned. The power of the sea, nature has its own control and everything can happen. Magical, this is how the dolphins are described. It's not often you see dolphins on your travels. Captain describes the sea as remarkable and beautiful. There's lots of quotation in here, but it's not entirely relevant is the problem. And this is why you've got to be careful about the quotes you use. Do they actually make sense with the comments you're making? If you're just writing down a lot of quotes from the article or from the text, it's not going to be useful. It's going to waste a lot of your time. Smaller quotes, much more effective. So the captain describes the sea as remarkable. The captain is informing the reader by telling about Al-Shama and the trip across the Arabian Sea. It's all simple description, some examples, but no comment on the effect. It doesn't say the captain describes the sea as remarkable and beautiful, which helps the reader to imagine what the sea looks like, and we get an impression that it's unusual and striking. There's no explanation of that quote, is there? Right, we're just going to have a look then at another student's. Now just bear with me. Okay, yeah, this is the one I wanted us to look at next. A good sign here for me, because it says the writer uses many language features to both inform the reader and describe to the reader about his around the world voyage. So I know that the student understands the task, and they're going to give me a combination of informative language features and descriptive ones. Firstly, the writer uses, see here it's interesting, the students crossed out and gone back and corrected themselves, identifying the correct language feature, which is anecdotes, to inform the reader about the dangers of the sea from Captain Sullivan's point of view. For in a storm last year, his brother's ship was sunk and 18 drowned. The effect of anecdote, in this instance, is to inform the reader to the dangers that the sea presents. This affects the reader emotionally, as they can hone in and put a name about the fallen sailors, which is a bit more powerful than reading a statistic. So, to me, that's quite a developed comment on the effect. So, I've mentioned anecdotes up here, you've got the quote, and then all of this is explanation about the effect of that. So that's why they credited that with a developed comment on the effect. The writer uses onomatopoeia, and see here that the examiners put LF, meaning language feature, that they've managed to identify. Use onomatopoeic noises to describe the current state of the ship's engines over the resonating rumble of the engine. So that's a relevant quote, isn't it? I'm going to talk about onomatopoeia, and then I'm going to find a quote that proves that. This is used to describe the health of the ship's taking it a while to scroll down. The health of the ship's engine, as extensive use of it would make it prone to furling. This language informs and describes the tension of the crew members hearing the engine rumble. Okay, so there's certainly a comment on the effect of that. It's not necessarily 100% clear, the link, but it's still going to be credited. The writer uses repetition on the word calm to inform and describe the state of the ocean around them. I'm not quite sure whether students went that. Of calm repeated, or the use of calm repeated over and over again, creates the image of a peaceful sea that the crew is in. So, do you see how this student really engages with what is the effect of that quote upon us as a reader? What is it doing to us, and what is it making us think of? It's also a form of personification. So that's the fourth language feature this student's mentioned so far. Finally, the writer uses verbs to describe the dolphin near the ship. Lazily and luxuriously rolling indicate the reader how the dolphins are not afraid of the crew members and are peacefully staying near the ship. Later in the article, a power of 3 is used, diving, backtracking, returning. This is used to describe to us the specific action the dolphins are doing. So there's a few more language features and explanation. Really kind of one developed explanation there. And you can see this student's been awarded 10, which is a fantastic mark for the language question. And the examiners have said all band 2 and a clear focus. The example's sometimes a bit wobbly, but there was one developed comment on the effect, and that's that one right early on in their answer. A couple more developed comments like that, and the student would have got full marks. So top tips on this: learn your language features, make your point the identification of a feature, your evidence a quote, which is that feature, and your explanation should be a comment on what's the effect of that feature and that quote on the reader. Okay, good luck with that one.